Welcome back to our third lesson in our learning series on workflow automations in the Meraki dashboard. My name is Mike Cohane, and today we'll be building on our web service project by introducing the concepts of variables and conditionals and using those to give a little bit more power to our web service and add more capabilities. Let's take a look at how we can do that. We're back in the workflow automation section of the Meraki dashboard. Here is our JSON placeholder web service that we built in our previous lesson. We're going to add to this, but we don't want to lose the service we just created, so we're going to duplicate this to a new workflow. On the right side under Actions, I'm going to say Duplicate. So that is going to happen in the background. I can close this while it occurs. All right, duplication is complete. There's my copy. Let's open that one up. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the name from copy to, let's call it JSON placeholder web service plus. Now, since I copied it, I have all the characteristics of categorization from my previous, which is great. That's what I wanted to have. All right, now in our first web service, the HTTP request to our JSON placeholder was somewhat simple. It came in here and made a GET call and hard-coded the operation that it was going to perform to only pull the users. Well, I'd like to be able to pull any request from that service. Let's go back up to the web service and see what capabilities they actually had. I could have done the posts, comments, albums, photos. There's 6 different options that I could have chosen from. So I'm going to make it an input request to my workflow for the user to tell me which one of these do they want. So for that, I will need a variable. How do I create variables? In the main palette, which I've just clicked on, if I close General to make it easier to look at, variables, I'm going to open that up and I'm going to add our first variable. That variable name, I'm going to call it operation. You could call it resource. And this is, what operation do you want to run against our JSON placeholder service? Makes sense? Good documentation for your variables helps people come along later and know what to do with them. The scope of the variable is it an input? Is it an output? Is it something I'm using locally as transient variable in my workflow? This is an input variable. I'm going to ask for it. In fact, this is going to be required for the workflow to run. They must provide it. Now, it's a string. What type of string? There's all kinds of different types of strings, which makes very powerful capabilities within workflows. We're going to come back and touch base on more of these, but for now, all I care about is a text. This is just a text string. And I'm going to provide a default value to it, users. Notice I'm not putting /users. That feels like an awkward thing for me to ask somebody to input. So I'm only going to have the name operation itself, users. This is the default. And we'll save that out. All right. Now we can run this. Well, we can't run it yet. If we look at our HTTP request, that's hard-coded to users. How do I make this use the variable, the input variable I just created? So I've highlighted users and I've deleted it. I've left the // that's required for an API call. How do I make it put the input variable that the user provides? Let's go ahead and click our operation selector on the right side. Now what this is going to be is, in our workflow, we have an input variable called operation. As easy as that. I just click on it and that value will be provided as my relative URL / and then whatever value is provided. That's all I need to do. So let's go ahead and run that and see if it works. We'll click run. Let's leave the default users. We will run that and we succeeded. If we click on the JSON path query, scroll down, there's all our usernames. Looks great. Let's modify that and run it again. But this time let's put in posts. So I want to pull back the posts, not the users. Let's run that. Uh-oh, not looking good. The HTTP request was good. Let's click on that. And that looks good. These are all the posts that are up on that server. So cool, that looks good. But our JSON path query failed. It failed because if you notice in this JSON, there's no, let's open that up, there's no values for, in this JSON, let's go to the end, scroll past all this. Sorry about that, I should have just gone to the end, made it easier. But we have the error. $, wildcard name is not valid for that JSON body that was returned. In other words, there's nothing called name in posts, so it errors out. Excellent. Now, what are we going to do about that? There are lots of ways to solve this problem, but for our lesson, I want to introduce the concept of a conditional. So how can I use a conditional in here? So based on the type of request that I asked, I know what to query within that body. Okay, so I'm going to go back, I'm going to click on the modify, and I'm going to add a conditional between the JSON path query and the HTTP request, where if this is of type users, then I'll do one type of query. If it's of type posts, I'll do another query. Now there's lots of ways you can do this, but let's just do this logic for now. On the left side, you see activities, logic, and workflows. We've done things with activities already. What's this logic all about? If I click on that, here we're going to have things I can do, loops, conditionals, I can group things together. So here we can do advanced operations within a workflow. In fact, it's very simple to do a conditional. I'll just drag it in and let it go. Now I have a conditional block, and I will fill this out, and based on how I set it up, it will run through these conditionals based on that deterministic path. So let's go ahead and change the name first. So I've clicked on it. I'm not going to call it a conditional block. I'm going to use something more readable. Parse based on operation type. Okay? And when I click back here, you can see it's changed it. And these are the different conditions. So in the first condition, what I'm going to say is, I'm going to check a value against another value. And if it's true, I'll drop in this block. If not, I go to the next block. So what do I mean by a property? I'm going to click on our reference. So in our workflow, for our input variable, if that equals users, then I'm going to drop into this activity. Now I'm going to click, and I'm going to rename that. So I'm going to come up here and change this. Call this the users branch. And you'll see me label things a lot. Might get frustrating for you to watch. I just do it because it's good practice. Now over here we have another conditional branch. This is going to be the posts branch. And down here, the same property, operation, if that equals posts, then I'm going to drop into this branch. Okay, now what am I going to do? Well, we already know the JSON path query in this case is going to be set already. This already works. So if I run down here and I do users, I will drop into this branch. If I do posts, I'll drop into this branch. I haven't done anything yet, but maybe this is a good chance to validate and make sure things work. So validate and run it. And I will say users and run. We should see it drop down this first left side, which it did. So there's our JSON path query. And if we scroll down, we'll get the names. So everything works as expected. Let's go back and modify this. So let's now do a JSON path query against the values we got back in the posts. So I'm going to make this a little easier on myself. I'm going to duplicate that JSON path query. I'm going to drag it over here. Okay, so now on this side, in my post branch, this JSON path query, I know it's not going to work because this is $name. We need to find out what information do I want to pull out of the posts. So how can I go back to my previous run and see what that value was? I could run it again, but that's unnecessary because we have all our previous runs. Up here, I'll click on View Runs. And I'm going to see, here's all my previous runs. And there's my failure. If I click on this web service right here where we failed and view that workflow, in that case, I can look at all the previous information. The variable operation in that case had the value posts. So what did my HTTP request return? it returned all the posts. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to put that up into our JSON path query. All right. And as expected, the name doesn't resolve in that because it's not valid. So what's a good thing we could return here? We could return the title. Let's take a look at the title. Yeah, that's not very pretty, but it is appropriate. Okay, so here are all the titles for all the posts in that. I could do titles, and I could probably add the ID to that, but for now we're just trying to keep it simple. So this will work. I'm going to grab that, and I'm going to go back into my automation. Let's modify. In my JSON path query for posts, I will change this to title. And let's run that. We'll go here and do posts and run it. And that went to the post branch and did a JSON path query, and we'll get past all of that information. And you can see here that inside of our title, you can see I made a mistake. I left it as the same variable name. That was not a good idea. I should change this to titles. So let's go ahead and do that. But otherwise, you can see that this looks good. But let's clean this up so it's appropriate. Inside JSON path query, when I pull this information out, it's going to put it in a variable that I can, think of that as a local variable that I can use later for references. So I'm going to change that to title and save that. So now we have a web service that can do at least, it can do all HTTP requests, but for anything of type users or posts, I'll actually pull out the information. Everything else comes back inside of the body. Now, how do I give that information back to the users who run this workflow? So I'm going to set up another variable. I'm going to go back over here and click on the main palette. So click Add Variable. Now, we're going to label this variable Output Results. Actually, before I do that, what type is this going to be? It's going to be a string that I'm going to call Output Results that holds the complete JSON body from the web service. Spell that right. From the web service. Okay, great. That is going to be an output variable, and the string type is going to be JSON. All right, let's save that. Now, just because I have the variable, how do I put something in that variable? At the very end, I want to do that. Now, we could do more with these JSON path queries, but for now, I just want to get this body stored. So we're going to go back to our core, and you're going to look down here, and we're going to find a set variable operation. So in here, we're going to put set variable. And on the right side, what are we going to set? Click on our reference. We're going to have an output variable called results. And in that value, if we click on right, we're going to hit our activities. In our HTTP request, store the full body in that. We'll save that, validate it, and run it. We'll do users and run that. Okay, it's complete. And if I look at my output results, you'll see the full JSON here. So now we have a web service that returns as its output variable. Now think of this as we called it from a webhook or from an API launch. I want a variable to tell me what these results are. I don't want to have to go dig through and find my HTTP request and what I got back from it. I want my workflow to complete and give me this information. And that's what we've done here. But we're really not done yet. Let's go back into Modify. Let's run this again. And this time, for my input, I'm going to put foo. Now, there is no operation called foo, so the web request should fail. And it did. So if we click on it, it came back with an error. Let's take a look at the errors we got back. All the way down the bottom, we got a 404. That's not found. So I would have liked to get a 200 operation okay, but this said 404. So we need a way to handle this. So if somebody puts in the wrong information, we can generate an appropriate message. So let's go ahead and modify this, and let's build on our lessons of conditionals. I'm going to make this a little smaller. And let's put another conditional in here before this to check and see if that failed or not. So I'm going to go back into logic, and I'm going to put a conditional block in. Now in that block, I'm only going to do one thing. This block is going to be validate HTTP request to make sure it worked. And in here, we're going to look at the output status code and make sure that it's not a 404. If it's a 404, not found, then we're going to drop into this branch and terminate. So we're going to look at the HTTP request and come down here to the status code. So that status code, if that equals a 404, then I'm going to drop into this. I'm not even going to use this branch over here, so I'm going to delete this branch. Delete. And we're going to change the name of this to be operation not found. So I know if I come in here, then my value is going to be operation not found. So I know I'm going to be ending my workflow. I don't want to do anything else. So let's go and let's set our variable for our output results to indicate that we didn't do this properly. So my output variable results, I'm going to put a string in here that says invalid operation passed to workflow. Then I want to end this workflow. So in my logic, I can click on logic and I can say we're done. So if I come down this path, we're done. We failed, and I can add another failure message, invalid operation. So these will be returned to API operators. So I have two conditionals now. The first conditional is going to check to make sure my HTTP request was proper, and then if it was, I'll come down and do my other operation. So let's validate and run that. And again, I will use foo and run that. Oops, it failed again. So I missed one critical operation, and you'll probably run into this too, so I'm glad I did. Because this failed, when it fails an operation, it stops right where you are, unless, if we click modify, unless you tell it explicitly, continue execution on failure. So that little checkbox will do that. And so we've got that set. Now we'll run it. We'll put in foo, we'll run. Okay, the problem now is, if you look, we actually did not drop into our conditional. We skipped it and continued running, which we didn't want to do because this is not a valid operation. Why didn't we drop in? And the reason is we checked the status code on this. And the status code on this is actually not the value we wanted to check. If we scroll all the way down, we want the error code. The error code is what tells us that this is a 404. So I looked at the wrong variable. So it's easy to change that. So we're going to go in here and modify it. And we're going to go to the operation when we did our conditional. And we're going to delete this. And we're not going to use this status code. Instead, we're going to say HTTP request error, give me the error code. And if that is a 404, then we're going to drop in. So let's validate that and run it. We're going to use foo again and run this. Now this time we came in exactly as expected. And again, people will hit this all the time. They'll be like looking at the wrong values. It's very common. That's why I wanted to show you it. I do it all the time. Very simple, but also very simple to fix. So now we've completed. We've dropped into our invalid operation for our HTTP request. Our output result gives a nice error message, invalid operation passed to the workflow. So they know that that value could probably have put the actual operation name that was passed in. That would probably be a good idea. Why don't we do that just so we have it for future ones? When we set this variable, let's say invalid operation passed to workflow, and let's put in what that variable was so people know. So we're going to go back to our workflow, get our input variable called operation. That's going to be part of our output string, so it'll be very complete. Okay, let's stop right here. We've done quite a bit, but there's still a lot more we can do. We've started to parse these JSON path values returned from the HTTP request. There's a lot more we can do here. Now that we understand conditionals, now that we understand variables, a little bit about debugging, we can get a bit more sophisticated. We'll do that in our next lesson. Thank you.